Okay, sorry about the slow start to part 2 of the week 3 lectures. I wanted to pick up with some of the inspired curriculums that are around currently that we see in practice. And the first one I want to touch on is Reggio Emilia. Reggio Emilia is a town actually located in northern Italy. It's not actually named after, this approach isn't named after anyone, it's actually named after a particular town. Loris Malaguzzi was a teacher who came to Reggio Emilia and who developed this particular approach. And what's exciting about this approach is that it is very much based on a number of theories. As you saw with DAP, with DAP, the same happens with Reggio Emilia. But this approach respects and puts into practice many of the aspects of the work of some of the theorists such as John Dewey, who we haven't discussed, but I suggest you might want to have take some time to read some of his work, Piaget, Vygotsky, and some of the others. Now, it's a system that lends itself very much to collaboration. That's collaboration among children, amongst teachers and parents, and co-construction of that collaboration. It also has a deep use of co-construction of knowledge. It looks at the role of culture in understanding some independence and interdependence of individuals and social learning in particular. It suggests that children have a right to be recognised as individuals with legal, civic and social responsibilities and rights, and that children are both the source and constructors of their own experience and thus are active participants in the organisation of their identities, abilities and autonomy, their experiences, and that's all developed through the relationships and interconnections and interactions with their peers, with adults, with ideas, with objects, and with real and imaginary events of the intercommunicating world. Sounds complex, but it actually lends itself very nicely to what really is a project type style of work. Within the Reggio Emilia approach, the environment is incredibly important. It's seen as a third teacher. The layout, therefore, of the physical space is valid. So the arrangement of the room, of the structures within the room, of the objects and activities should encourage choice, should encourage problem solving, should encourage discoveries in the process of learning. So in preparing the space in particular, and I've used an image there of a Reggio-inspired centre. It's not in Reggio Emilia, it's elsewhere, but they've taken an inspiration for their program from the Reggio Emilia approach, where it invites children in to the space and they offer possibilities of children to be with the teachers and with other children, or a few children, or even alone. So there's multiple ways of working within the space that's really important to have for the children to actually choose which way they want to work and how they want to work. So teachers, though, have to be really aware that children also learn from their peers, which in a lot of ways is that Vygotskian approach, and especially when they can interact in small groups. And I think that the quote I've got there for you actually is probably the most valid, that the Reggio Emilia curriculum or approach is not child-centred, nor is it teacher-directed. It is child-originated and teacher-framed. And a lot of the work we do now, in whatever program we're running, does sit very much in that framework. I also wanted to give you a quick introduction to Head Start, a program that came out of President Lyndon Johnson of the United States, his Great Society campaign, which started, for him, this Head Start program started in 1965. The Great Society program was around lifting productivity of the poorest of American society, and you need to have that in the back of your mind whenever you talk about this program. They're actually looking at improving productivity, and they're targeting the poor of American society. So it's not that it's actually seen as giving a great education to children, although it may. It's not seen as being there for that purpose at all. It's purely and simply seen how to meet the needs of disadvantaged communities so that they can put in to be more productive for the rest of society. Originally a short-term program, and what was fascinating for me in particular was that and many of the educators around, that it was headed by paediatricians and psychologists. No education, no educators, paediatricians and psychologists. So coming from a very different paradigm from the paradigm that we would probably come from as educators. Again, child development program to help communities meet the needs of disadvantaged preschool children. It's not prescriptive, but it has some very clear guidelines. Having said it's not prescriptive, there's not a lot of space in there to make the program meet the needs of the community, but it's expected that's what it will do. The focus is on 3 to 5 year olds, and the community has to apply for the funds to run the programs. Some of the things that are fascinating about Head Start is that Sesame Street was developed as part of the program. That was one of the big pushes through there. It was interesting at one stage when, after a number of years of running the program, they felt the children's development had stopped and hadn't been keeping up with the development of others and plateaued, and funding was pulled away from Head Start for a while. And then when these children reached adolescence and they reassessed them, they found out that there were some economic benefits they hadn't expected. What becomes interesting there is the money started going back into Head Start. Having said that, the money still hasn't gone up. It's still, they've got to argue for it constantly. They keep saying that they're going to put more money into it, but from all the reports I've been seeing coming out of America, that hasn't been happening. So what happened? The results are always seen in dollar terms. What they're saying is that for every dollar spent in the Head Start program, they save $16. How do they do that? What they're finding is that children that go through this program and other programs such as Abecedarian, which runs out of North Carolina, is that there's less things such as incarceration as adults and into adulthood. There is less teen pregnancies. There is improved healthcare outcomes, so there's less likelihood of conditions such as diabetes, because they argue that with better education people understand the importance of healthy eating. There are more college graduates coming out of the program. Now if you add all those things up, to have a person incarcerated for a year costs around $100,000. So they're saying for every dollar they spend by keeping somebody in the Head Start program, they're saving, by not having to spend money putting them into, it's making some sense, into prisons. There's also reduced use of drugs across the board. So all of those things which eventually cost society money to improve healthcare outcomes or to improve quality of life later on don't need to be spent, because that dollar is probably better invested in the early childhood program. Interesting that they're not putting more money into it, but I think the thing that I find kind of interesting is that we can actually use a similar argument for all of early childhood programs. I don't see why it would in any way, shape or form just be around Head Start. Okay, Te Whariki is the New Zealand early childhood curriculum policy statement, and it's a framework for providing children's early learning and development with a socio-cultural context. Te Whariki emphasises that learning partnership that exists between teachers, parents and families, and teachers weave a holistic curriculum in response to children's learning and development in the early childhood setting and in the wider context of the children's world. So they're saying it doesn't all occur here in the setting, it occurs in the child's world. It's the first bicultural curriculum statement developed in New Zealand. It emphasises the critical role of socially and culturally mediated learning and a reciprocal and responsive relationships with children, with people, places and things. Not dissimilar in some ways to some of the things you've just read about Reggio Emilia in terms of that responsive relationships and reciprocity that actually occurs for children. Children learn through collaboration with adults and peers, and through guided participation and observation of others, as well as through the individual exploration and reflection. At the centre of the curriculum are 4 broad principles: holistic development, family and community, relationships, and empowerment. Empowerment is the curriculum which empowers children to learn and grow. The holistic development looks at the curriculum and reflects a holistic way children learn and grow. Family and community is about the wider world of family and community, and it's integral into the curriculum. And relationships argues that children learn through responsive and reciprocal relationships with people, places and things. Tifuriki has some strands, excuse me, and it's woven from 4 principles and from 5 strands of essential learning and development. The principles and strands form the framework for the curriculum, and each strand has several goals. So keeping this in mind when we start talking about our national frameworks, that you often have a strand with goals within that. We have something very similar in our framework. Learning outcomes are developed for each goal in each of the strands, so that Tifuriki becomes this integrated foundation for every child's development. And the strands I've listed there are well-being, belonging, contribution, communication and exploration. And I like the way they frame some of this, that the child learns through active exploration of the environment. So they've got to be engaged in the environment and involved with it. Communications around language and symbols of their own and other cultures are promoted and protected. Opportunities for learning are equitable and each child's contribution valued. Children have a sense of belonging, and you'll see that again in our curriculum. You'll see all this in our curriculum, but particularly we emphasise belonging, and one of well-being, where the health and well-being of the child protected and nurtured. Most of the work I've read have in this order, well-being being a particular issue in New Zealand for the islander populations who don't have the same health good fortune perhaps that some of the white groups do in New Zealand. Okay, in a moment I want to go on to the Victorian framework, but I think I might leave it there for just a minute, and you can go off and get a cup of coffee or whatever you need to do, and then come back and view section 3 in a moment.